Thank you so much for coming today. Welcome to the 5 essential tools for transactional psychosis. We all know that statistically the chances of our clients closing a deal is not very high. It's about 50-50 depending on the sources. We also know that those deals that do close are oftentimes considered a failure. Why is that? Well, I'm Wendy Dickinson. I'm called the M&A coach. I work with business owners on the psychological aspects of primarily mergers, acquisitions, and family succession. I think of this process as almost like each of you are the experts, and your clients are the experts in their business. And so how to reduce the learning curve so that you can equip your clients to successfully cross that finish line so that they're able to close their deal. So what we're going to do today is familiarize you with 5 different tools that I feel are essential. We're going to take a look at how you can use those tools in your deals with your clients to help them navigate that transition. And then lastly, we just want to get clear that the intention here is to maximize your clients' returns and minimize their emotional regrets. So for the purposes of our discussion today, I'd like for us to think about this like hiring a general contractor to build your house. We don't tell that guy how to do his business, do we? I mean, maybe we do, but should we? Probably not. But we also, I'm sure many of us have run across houses, different buildings, that have not been soundly constructed. Maybe there were some corners cut. Maybe somebody didn't have a real understanding of how they were going to or how they should best build that house. And that's where your expertise comes in. Because at those moments, like Matt and Ginger Bradbury said earlier this morning, boy, did they cue me up or what? But as they said, that emotional roller coaster, how to create less of the highs and the lows. More temperate, more even. And I believe that there are ways, using these 5 tools, where you can set up the conversation at the very beginning of your process so that you are able to partner with that person and build a team to navigate that transition. So, the 5 tools are mindset, awareness, readiness, resilience, and strategy. And we use those words a lot. As a matter of fact, Matt, you used mindset and awareness in several different ways this morning. I'd like to take it a little farther. So, we're not going to talk about clinical psychosis here. I was talking to somebody earlier whose wife is a psychiatrist. I actually started off in that field as well, or in the field of mental health. We're going to talk about it in the more generic form, like people who lose touch with reality, when their emotions get in the way. A year ago, I went to an event with the Virginia Bar Association, and it was on mergers and acquisitions, and it was so interesting because every advisor that I spoke to said, take the emotion out of it. That's what I tell my clients, take the emotion out of it. But they're people. And so are you. And so we really can't take the emotion out of it. So what we want to do is set your clients up, or our clients up, to successfully make that climb, not have a catastrophic fall. My name is Wendy Dickinson, as I mentioned earlier. And you might say, well, why is Wendy Dickinson up here talking about this? I started my career as an outpatient therapist. I worked with clients on mental health and substance abuse issues. And then back in the 90s, my husband and I, with another couple, formed a company. And we sat down around a table and we set the intention that we were going to start this company and that we were going to build it to sell it. We chose our ideal acquirer. I'm going to age myself now, so it was a document management business, and we called it Document Warehouse, and we sold it to Iron Mountain. So every decision we made, every system, process, client relationship we started, we modeled it after our ideal acquirer. Of course, that doesn't happen very often, does it? So fast forward, I became a coach, and it occurred to me after going to a number of different events, different advisors, Oh, did I mention that my husband has been a mergers and acquisitions investment banker for 25 years? So we've been in that arena for a long time. The number of deals that go sideways because of a word said, a strategy not fully explored, and then the emotional fallout. So, catastrophic fall or climb. What I'd like for us to do is really take a look at who you are as an advisor. Some of you have, I think there's scratch paper out. If you have to list your 3 strengths, greatest strengths, that you bring to your clients, what would those be? Jot those down, please. Now let's talk about process. Let's, as a group, list the phases of the deal. What's the very first thing? What would you call phase 1?
Getting the client.
Engagement, okay. Phase 2?
Marketing.
We should have just asked Matt to put his document up, shouldn't we? The marketing. 3.
Closing.
Diligence, right? Would you say diligence is part of the process? So, are you the same person? Do you bring those 3 strengths that you've just written down to each phase of the deal? Probably. It's probably evolved. You've developed those things. You've changed those things as you've become more experienced and over the years. But how many of you work with clients that have never sold a deal before? It's a different experience for them, isn't it? Okay, so now I'd like for you to just 2 or 3 words, jot down who your most difficult client in your whole career, well, not their names, we want to maintain confidentiality here, but jot down 3 aspects of your most difficult client and what that was like. Just 3 words. Now, bring to mind the most difficult deal of your career. And now turn your attention to your ideal client. 3 things that you look for in an ideal client. The 5 tools, mindset, and for our purposes today, we're looking at fixed versus growth, awareness of self, of others, and awareness of the industry, readiness, change, innovation, disruption, resilience, and then finally strategy. Each of these tools can allow you to frame the entire process for your clients so that they're able to navigate the transition emotionally with greater success. So the first tool is mindset. Carol Dweck wrote the book Mindset. It's one of my favorite books on this topic. And as you'll see from the definitions in front of you, a fixed mindset is when somebody says, okay, you know, I'm kind of smart, got an IQ of whatever, that's probably about as much as I'm going to be able to do. As opposed to the person with a growth mindset who's like, yeah, so I have this IQ, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to work really hard. And so whatever opportunities I have, whatever skills that I have, I'm going to continue to grow and develop those things. And the reason I bring this to your attention is how many times, especially I'm going to say during the diligence phase, does your client say, I can't, or I won't, or this isn't acceptable? Those are words that to you should signal a fixed mindset. And what people are generally doing at that point is expressing this fear, anxiety of the unknown, the stress that's happening at the moment. Those are signals to you as an advisor. So that verbiage is your signal to then turn it around and say, is that really true? What if, and then offer an alternative. So, looking at your most difficult client, can you recall a time where the person exhibited a fixed mindset? Each of those opportunities to really reframe a conversation, because what happens when somebody is with a fixed mindset is that then they're engaged in a mode of thinking that is an obstacle or a roadblock for the deal. Secondly, we have awareness. One of the best books I know of this is Ray Dalio's book, Principle. And Matt discussed this a bit earlier about awareness of self, knowing your strengths, weaknesses, blind spots, but also knowing those of your clients. Someone earlier said, how do you have that conversation with a client? One of the ways that I would propose that you consider doing that is at your introductory meeting, before you're even engaged, to have a conversation where you say, I'm interested in developing a partnership with you. I would like to make sure that I increase your chances of success. So, what I would like for us to do is to exchange information about one another. Have you taken DISC, or have you taken Myers-Briggs, or whatever? There's so many. Colby is a great one. Have you taken any of these assessments? The person says, yeah, I don't even know where that is anymore. Well, maybe you have one that you like, that you know your own results, and you can say to the person, okay, on a Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENTJ, and I would really like for you to take this. So if you take it, then we could exchange that information. We'll know how to complement one another throughout the deal. We'll be able to bring out one another's strengths, to complement one another as we progress. So again, but before you're even engaged, the person, you share the results, and then during that time and diligence when they're like, I can't do this, I'm overwhelmed, I don't have time for this. And you can say, you know, remember when we took that assessment together earlier, or we shared those results? I know that this is one of the times where you get really bogged down. Or I can see that this is a lot for you. Who else can we bring into this process to take some of this off your plate so that you're able to handle that? So with the Kolbe, which is Kolbe, they look at 4 different it's cognitive abilities. And so they look at 4 different cognitive abilities. They look at fact-finding, they look at follow-through, they look at whether the person's a quick start or whether they're an implementer, and where they on a scale. And it's like a scale of 1 to 10. And the interesting thing for those of us sitting here about that particular one is if somebody is really bogged down in diligence and they are just at the end of their rope, my guess is that they're really high on the quick start, but they're really low on the fact finder and follow through and the implementation. That's the kind of information so that if you set the conversation up in the beginning, it gives you greater information so that you know how to be present with that person. You know how to listen to them. You know how to set them up to succeed. The third is readiness. So again, at that initial meeting and engagement, you look at where are the gaps in knowledge. So if the person has never sold a deal before, your approach is going to be much different than if somebody has sold things in the past. And so you'll be able to identify that. And you can say things like, it is very common for people in your position at this stage in the deal to feel this. It's normal. Everybody feels that way. Okay, here's an aside that's interesting. There have been 2 studies, one done with college freshmen. They took 3 groups. The control group had no intervention whatsoever. The second one met with a therapist once a week. And the third group had 90 minutes where they sat down with somebody and the person as a group, and they were told, this is what's going to happen, this is what people normally feel, and these are the tools that you can utilize. And that is the group that had the best outcome of the 3. So, it's worth your time to set it up to work at the beginning, in that engagement phase, in that preliminary meeting phase. Exchange the information. These are the things that I'm really strong at as a broker or as an advisor. These are the things that it looks like you're really strong. How can we meet and how can we partner with one another to successfully sell your deal? And here's the other thing. People want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want their opinions to count. And so when you see that person as real, as an authentic person, you're willing to look at what their weaknesses are, work with them even through their gaps in their knowledge, that's affirming to them. Transferable systems, best fit buyer. These are things that if someone's never sold a deal before, they don't have any continuum of experience on, but you do. And if you know how this person takes in information, if you know where their gaps are, you're able to phrase that in a way that allows them to feel part of the process, to feel like they're fully partnering with you. So you get the opportunity to coach the owner. And that's a different hat to wear than advising the owner. When you coach the owner, you are coaching them to bring out the best that they have to offer, to help them show up in the deal, in the partnership with you, to lead their team with integrity. The fourth is resilience. So, not surprisingly, most of the people sitting here are men. When you meet somebody for the first time, in my experience, what generally happens is that you very, very quickly discover one another's interests, right? Perhaps sports teams, different things that you do in your free time. And maybe you bring those things up when you start a conversation. You might say, you know, as the deal progresses, this and that and the other. But at the same time, how many of you have said, I can see that you're stressed, and I can see that you're tired. How about if we go ahead and take a walk when we meet instead of sitting down for lunch? How about if we go out on the golf course and hit some balls? How about if we do some, and then to carry that conversation is because I'm concerned. I can see that today you're not at the place you were when we started this. Your enthusiasm, your energy, whatever your observation is. Again, the person may say, no, I'm fine, I'm good, I've got it. But they know that you have truly seen them. You have truly affirmed and acknowledged that this is a stressful time for them. And it might also be the time where you normally say, and you would continue to say this is normal. This is how this works. So, mindset, awareness, readiness, and resilience, and then a strategy. And Matt talked earlier about contingencies. Letting people know what may or may not happen at every stage of the deal. And so when you are utilizing the tools of mindset, awareness, readiness, and resilience, then you're also able to use that and incorporate those skills into your strategy with the client. All right. I'm going to ask you to partner up, or groups of 3, whatever works out best for you. And I'd like for you to begin to develop a case study. So again, no names, but I'd like for you to begin by answering these questions. Use your most difficult client example. Discuss which mindset that client utilized. How did your awareness manifest, and how did your client's awareness manifest? How ready was your client for each stage of the deal, and how you can increase your client's ability to build resilience in the process of a transaction. I'll give you about 5 minutes, which I know is like no time, but if you could. Okay, so we've all walked down memory lane and revisited that most difficult client. What are the things that stand out in your minds about that scenario of the most difficult client?
Everything you hear up front is not the truth.
Yeah.
You don't get the whole story. You don't get the whole story.
So I have to say that to me sounded like lack of honesty, not getting the whole story, is that, did you get the sense of lack of honesty there or a lack of experience?
Probably a combination of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not only the lack of honesty, it's the fact that a lot of times they're afraid to tell their personal issues which
Yes.
are impacting on the business. So they don't tell you the whole story because they don't quite trust you yet. But at the
Yes.
same time, they tend to be unrealistic.
Yes.
They tend to be stubborn
Yes.
and unwavering.
Yes.
And also untruthful, by the way. And that's where you start. And what you have to do is evolve that over a period of time where they get to trust you well enough to say, well, it's really not the business, here's what's going on. And when you start to uncover those issues, then you could really get down to putting in a transaction.
So let me ask you all this. Knowing what you know, because a number of you were nodding as he spoke, that yes, this is your experience. What do you do to set the conversation up in that early meeting, that early stage, so that as this information comes out, the person feels comfortable presenting it? How can you set that conversation up to happen? How do you set it up to happen?
You mean so that they don't feel the need to withhold information?
Right.
What I tell them is, I tell them, listen, it's going to come out sometime. Whether it's now, we discuss the problems and issues now, or we're discussing it in due diligence, and we risk a deal falling apart. So let's get it all out now and address it right up front. And that usually resonates with folks.
I would also suggest that each of you consider every time you meet with someone, and okay, let me back up. At the first time you meet with someone, to say, many times as our relationship develops, as our partnership develops, whichever word you would feel best using, as our partnership develops, you're going to feel more comfortable telling me more details about your business. I would appreciate it, and then go into Mike's suggestion, I would appreciate it if you could share all that you can at this point, because it's going to help us both. It's going to strengthen our partnership, and it's going to facilitate our working relationship. But please know that I also understand that there are going to be things that are held back for one reason or another, and I'm going to ask you at the beginning of every meeting, what can you share with me today? And then do it. At the beginning of every meeting, what can you share with me today that maybe you didn't feel comfortable sharing with me last time? Some sort of thing like that. Okay. Honesty, integrity, fear, anxiety, all of those things come up. And the honesty and integrity, of course, are values. And so what I would like for you to do, and what we're going to do next as a group, is to identify your top 5 values. Then I would like for you to look at that most difficult client and identify what you think their top values were. And then I would love for you to figure out or speculate with your ideal clients, what are their top values? And then we'll talk about a values conversation. So this process utilizes a growth mindset, an expanded sense of awareness, and it also utilizes readiness and resilience. One of the greatest causes of stress for all of us is if our top values are in some way being stomped on or compromised in some way. So if honesty is very important to each of you, and then someone doesn't tell you the truth, that's going to stick with you. So here is a list of values to help you. So if you would, take 5 minutes with your partner, pick out those values of yourself, your most difficult client, and your ideal client. And then we'll talk about how to frame that conversation. Okay, out of curiosity, would anybody be willing to share maybe their top 2 values personally? Yes.
Motivation.
Motivation, and it's not up there, so I'm going to add that to my list.
Professionalism.
Professionalism.
Respect.
Respect. Great one. And then, I'm sorry? Integrity, yes. That's
A desire to be a partner.
a desire to be a partner. Yeah.
As a partnership exercise.
Yeah. How about the values of your most difficult clients?
Greed.
Very
Greed?
opposite.
The opposite.
The opposite of the list we would make.
Yes, yeah. And how about for your ideal client?
All of the above.
Yeah, so your ideal client shares your values.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I think is interesting about this is for the client that is stressed and having difficulty keeping up with the pace of diligence or is holding things back, I think that's where you have the opportunity to frame a conversation using this information. So if during that initial exchange where you talked about your strengths and weaknesses and what you bring as far as your strengths are concerned, and then ask the client to identify their strengths, weaknesses, gaps, and blind spots, I think this is also an opportunity to talk about values, to represent your values, yourself, and to say, I would be very interested to know, in the interest of establishing a partnership with you, what your values are. What are your top 3 values? And here's where that information can get really helpful, is during a situation where a client is, in your estimation, allowing emotion to drive the bus, as opposed to really looking at the merits of the deal, that is where you have the opportunity to say, and let's say the person listed their top values as integrity, honesty, but also community. And maybe there's somebody who cares very much about the well-being of their employees. That's the opportunity for you to say, and I'm going to use your difficult client's name, Tom, do you recall that when we first met, and we're in the very beginning of where we were discussing that I would represent you in this transaction, that you mentioned that honesty, integrity, and community were your top 3 values. And Tom, I got to tell you, in the conversation we just had with that prospective buyer, I didn't see those values expressed. How can we frame this conversation, the next conversation that you have with your prospective buyer, so that your values are expressed in a way that you and your team can be proud of? How does that land?
Tough. It's tough to have the kind of candid conversation you're talking about in the initial conversation, because the whole part of this, from my viewpoint anyway, the whole principle of this is develop a trusting relationship, and it's very difficult to develop that trusting relationship when those are the first kind of questions you ask. You're kind of being in your face in front of a client, and I'm not sure that's really where you want to be in the first few minutes of a conversation.
I really respect your opinion, because I know that you and your company have a process. We just had the opportunity to meet last night and discuss. I will also say, or offer for each of you to consider, is that it's going to look different because you're going to use your words and your conversation and your process. I am suggesting that you start the relationship off in this way so that there is a very clear expectation around how the conversation and how the relationship and partnership is going to progress. Our brains don't like uncertainty. Our brains don't like stress. Our brains don't like change. And adding new people to our relationships, especially such an important relationship, can be very stressful. So I completely agree with John. It's very difficult to have that kind of conversation. But if you start it off by saying, the initial conversations that I have with prospective clients are really difficult. And I'm going to ask you some stuff that you may not want to answer, and I respect that. But I will tell you that for us to set our relationship up to work and to be successful so that we can lead your deal across the finish line, I truly believe that this is going to increase your statistics for your chances for success. And I think in that situation, or at least in my experience with my clients, that is also a mechanism for building that trust. So you're sharing your strengths and weaknesses. You're not just asking all of that from them, right? That they have to be the ones to be vulnerable and be real. I'm inviting you to do the same in whatever way you feel comfortable. Yes?
No, if I'm in that conversation on strengths and weaknesses, and I've been there the last 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
If the probable commission meets a certain threshold, changes my entire attitude. It doesn't anyone else, I'm sure, but I am going down a whole different path if that commission reaches a certain threshold.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Who I am.
Because that's the reality. Yeah, and I appreciate that. And so we've got to own who we are, right, in the conversation. And it might be that you say to the person, look, you stress confidentiality, right? What you say to me in this situation about who you are as a person, that's confidential. I'm sharing that confidential information with you. And I will tell you that these are the factors that I know about myself, or that in my experience, signals that we may have to change a strategy, that we may have to look at a different route. But you give them an idea of who you are so that they are able to make an informed decision about how to then respond in that situation. Does that make sense? Yeah. Here's another aspect that I think is really interesting, and we were talking about this, or different of us have talked about this, that sometimes clients take a long time to deliver on what they've promised to deliver, right? This information also gives you a means or a path towards accountability. So it's not only there really are several steps of accountability, and you can look at different models and such, but having the conversation in the beginning allows you to say to that person when their voices or their actions or they're really getting ready to go and take that huge drop, that gives you the opportunity to say, okay, let's take a breath. And by the way, in fight, flight, or fright, which are many of the times the situations where people are stressed, that's what they're acting on, it's that brainstem. Just having them actually take a breath puts their executive functioning back online. One deep breath. It's amazing. But we have to know that, right? We have to create the bandwidth and the space for the person to take that breath. But then you can say, and this is how we agreed that we were going to handle this particular situation. Tell me about this, because I know you to be a person of honesty, integrity, and community, and that's not the person I saw in this particular conversation. Tell me about that. No judgment, right? Just tell me about that. What's that about? What's going on? And the guy's like, well, you don't understand. They're in here asking me this, and I've gotten 25 emails in the last whatever. Yeah, this is the tough part, right? We talked about that in the beginning. This is part of the process. And it's understandable that you're feeling overwhelmed. So again, by setting it up to have some of these tools in place, you're able to circle back around and use that to help the client process. Okay. So the toolbox gets you to the desired outcome of the client. It helps you support the client. In the stages of the deal, you're educating the client, you're identifying the client's strengths, the client's gales, advice is given, advisors' strengths are taken into consideration, you've shared your blind spots, they've shared their blind spots, you both know where the gaps in knowledge are, you know the values, and then there's give. And so what do some of these terms mean? Well, I'd like to introduce you to gales. G stands for gremlin, A for assumption, I for interpretation, and L for limiting beliefs. If your client is not acting in a way that's consistent and aligned with the values that you discovered earlier, then I would bet one of their gales have shown up. And what I mean by a gremlin is I mean that internal voice that kind of drives the person. We all have them. Sometimes it says to the person they're not enough, or they're going to be a failure, or this isn't going to work out, or they won't have enough money, or they'll never be able to take care of their family, or they're, a whole host of things that we can say to ourselves. And your job as the advisor is to identify when one of those gales pops up, and then point out to the person in a very respectful way that that particular belief isn't always true. So one of you guys shared that a client had turned down a deal for no reason, even though the offer was about $500,000 over the asking price. No reason, he just decided that, it wasn't enough. Well, didn't end up selling this deal, did he? Right? So how to use the knowledge that you have, how to use a tool like mindset and awareness and readiness and resilience to bring that sort of situation and shine another light on it. And I'm not going to tell you that every single time it's going to work. I'm going to tell you it's another tool in your arsenal. If you can say to a person, I think that's an interpretation on your part, or how do you think it's going to work if you are continuing to believe that your business is worth this, but the experts are saying, and your numbers are showing, that it's actually worth this. Tell me about that. How do you reconcile those differences? Okay? Okay, and we've talked about this, right? I call this GIVE. The grandiose inflated valuation expectation. So this to me is the quintessential fixed mindset, limited awareness, lack of readiness, and resilience, in the sense that the person has not considered the market analysis, is not taking your advice seriously, is not looking at what the possibilities are. And a lot of times with a fixed mindset, people are in either or thinking. And we always have at least 7 options. We can shut the deal down, we can hold the deal. We have a spectrum. And as advisors, if you know that person's values, if you know where they are on the spectrum as far as personality, and then you also are able to determine if any gales are present, you have some of the tools necessary to bring the person to the place where they can recognize that this valuation isn't going to fly under any circumstances. So let's say you meet with somebody who's at the very beginning of thinking about selling their business. And maybe the person could be an ideal client at some point, but they're not an ideal client right now. They're just not ready. Well, this particular slide talks about what I call crave. And they can, as a business owner, put this process into place so that they start developing a real working knowledge and familiarity with what the numbers are as far as in relationship to the market and the industry. And so, you know, looking at compilations, reviews, audits, evaluations, and then having them do their estate planning. I think it's a pretty clear indication that somebody has absolutely no intention of selling their deal if they continue to go through the transaction and yet haven't really given any instructions about what's going to happen with the money, the proceeds from the sale. And these things happen. You know they do. So, using your most difficult client example again with your partners, see if you can determine whether they had a gremlin at work, an assumption, an interpretation, or a limiting belief. And then also, you don't have to share this with your group if you don't wish to, or your partner, but see if they hit on any of your own gales. So take about 5 minutes and do that, please. And then also dive into how does that change your perspective of the relationship with the client. Okay, so looking at the gales, anything come to mind in your discussions about your difficult client? Anybody have any difficult clients whose gremlin was driving the bus at times? How about assumptions, interpretations, limiting beliefs? Yeah. So any thoughts or questions about how you could use this tool or this framework to support your clients?
One question. We see a lot of negative impact of getting a business that was previously listed or previously they tried to sell and it just went horrible. So every step in your process that you're taking, you're having to reaffirm that this is not the same issue that you were dealing with before. So it's making a prediction about the current buyer based on a failed transaction before. And we see a lot of them get derailed by that. So any advice on resetting the mindset going forward without, saying this is not, don't punish this buyer for your previous bad relationships or anything like that?
I think that's such an excellent question and point. So first of all, it takes about 7 positive experiences to dial back 1 negative one. And so that's a real liability in that situation. And so that person or that owner is, I would imagine, going to have a lot of assumption and interpretations based on that past experience. And so your opportunity as an advisor is then to be that person's coach and to say, you know, I think I hear vestiges of that last deal coming into this. Yeah, that happens. And to affirm, yes, that happened to you. And that was a really negative experience. However, let's really put that in the rearview mirror and let's be in the here and now. Right? Here's another thing that I think people tend to do is based on that past experience is they overreact. Right? They're not choosing a response, they're reacting, and because that's a tender spot, they are going all out. And so I think that's another opportunity as advisors where you can point that out to the person respectfully, right? But you can say, on the face of it, I think this is a conversation where what we could do is this, and we will work together. And if you find yourself at a place where you're feeling stressed by the conversation, let me know, and we'll hang up and we'll come back again. You know, we'll circle back to it later with the buyer or in diligence or whatever. I do think that as advisors, knowing that that person has that baggage, that they're carrying those beliefs around, that you have the opportunity to, again, affirm, yes, I acknowledge this happened, I hear what you said, and I have had clients that have had this happen. However, just because that happened to you last time, it does not mean it's going to happen to you again. And my job as your advisor is to make sure that we as partners set it up so that it doesn't. So in other words, again, you're affirming, and I'm sorry guys, but you're going to have to affirm like that about 100,000 times. For every dollar you bring in, you need one affirmation probably. All right, so now I'm going to give you another. So when you're building a house and you use a hammer, you might have a claw hammer, you might have a finish hammer, you might have a 25-pound hammer, you have different hammers. Well, I'm giving you a different kind of framework. So this is an energy framework, and this might be something that you actually feel more comfortable with in utilizing some of the tools that we've discussed already. In this framework, there's 7 levels of energy. And if it starts off like, I've even got a little model for you, like a spiral. So if those lower levels, the levels 1, 2, and 3 are at the bottom, we know that that's a darker place. It's a tighter place. And then at the top, it's more open, right? Well, in those first and second levels of energy, that's more catabolic. And for those of you that remember your biology, our bodies have catabolic energy and we have anabolic energy. And catabolic energy, we take our cells and we break them down and recycle and reuse and get rid of the stuff we don't need. In anabolic energy, we take that recycling stuff, those repurposing elements, we build new cells. Neither one is bad. If we didn't have the catabolic energy, we wouldn't be able to reuse stuff. And if we didn't have the anabolic, we wouldn't be able to, it just wouldn't balance. So one way to take a look at that sort of stuff in your initial conversations with your clients is to go ahead and look at, and this is not something you necessarily share with your clients, but for you yourself, your own interpretation, is to be able to look at that catabolic energy. If someone's angry, if they're feeling victimized, like probably the person that's tried to sell before and couldn't, their ability to see their options is not going to be as clear as someone who's not had that experience. And that anabolic energy, that's where you create, as an advisor, more breathing space. You're able to partner with the person, see who they are, accept them as they are, meet them where they are, and then help them take that deal across the finish line. So, how is the energy represented in the deal? So if you're having a conversation with somebody, you might be running this thought process through your mind. You might say, well, I'm going to use your example again. So this person has tried to sell their company before, it hasn't worked. Wonder if there's going to be any victimization, any feeling like that there. Maybe they're also angry, right, that it didn't work out. They invested all that time. They thought it was going to happen. Their hopes and dreams and expectations were dashed. So you as an advisor look for that, and then you look for the opportunity to shift the energy, to create more space. Maybe in the beginning you're just looking to get them to move out of that victimization, that anger phase, to say, you know, that happens a lot. Maybe you have a statistic around that in your own practice. You know, we have 20% of our deals that they just don't close. Or you look at the industry standard of, you know, 75% of deals don't close. So you say to the person, this happens. However, my own personal statistics, John shared with me last night that his company is like 85% that they take over the finish line. Our statistics are much better than the industry as a whole. So then you've created the space where the person goes, oh, well, maybe this is going to be different. And so then you have the opportunity to shift the client's energy. So from there, you can use mindset, awareness, readiness, and resilience and say, okay, so what I'd like to do is to partner with you and collaborate and create a strategy that's going to take your deal into a close. So now use your most difficult client example and consider where they were energy-wise. Where was your most difficult client energy-wise? Were they in the catabolic energy, or were they up in the stratosphere in the higher levels of anabolic energy? When you have a client who's angry and feeling like a victim, or who feels threatened, what happens to your energy? It's drained? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of times, for the work that each of you do, it's not a quick thing, is it? It's a sustained process. And so if that person has the tendency to visit that victimization or anger place, that's going to impact your energy over a longer period of time. As Matt and Ginger pointed out earlier today, if your ideal client is in front of you, it's a pleasurable, enjoyable experience. And if they're not, then it's a drain. Not only a drain on your finances, but it's also a drain on your energy and your time. Yes.
I still find whether it's ideal client or not ideal client, that it's still the cycle like they were talking about. I mean, there's good times in it, and there's times that aren't fun just because of what some of the clients have to do. And, you know, I like it. I tell them, I said, you're dating when you're looking at all these companies, and then you get engaged when you get your LOI and a sign or things like that. And then in between, you know, getting engaged and getting married, you have to go through the prenup.
Yes.
And get all the different pieces of it. And that it's not going to be fun and it's going to be painful. Right. I don't care what their style is. Their energy then is probably at some point in time going to be somewhat negative. And just because of what happened. So how would you combat that, knowing that piece is probably coming to some degree anyway, because no matter whether it's your ideal client or your not ideal client.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Gary. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do in those initial conversations is to anticipate that is going to happen. And then as the advisor, to remind that person each and every time, okay, so let's say you're moving from one phase of a deal to another. This is the time where the expectations that I have of you as owner are these. These are the times where you as an owner are going to expect of me this. This is what's realistic, this is what's not realistic. And to, again, normalize that up and down to some extent. Normalize, even though you've been great through this whole thing. You've been an awesome partner for me. We've enjoyed this transaction, our working relationship. But now we're getting into the tough part. And we've got to stay the course here. Here's what you can do to build up your readiness and your resilience for this. So maybe you say to the person, when you're in the marketing phase, but it's before that diligence phase, but you know what's coming and they don't really have an appreciation of what's coming, maybe that's when you have a conversation about, I'm going to really advise you to take care of yourself right now. Do all those things that you enjoy doing right now, because in the next phase of the deal, it's going to be much more difficult to do that. I need you to build up, right? Build up your bank of resilience. And so then check in with that person. Just want to know how you're doing. Want to see what's going on in your head, basically. How can you bring in additional team members to take some stuff off your plate so that you can be fully present during this diligence process. Because we all know when people get overwhelmed, they have a tendency, especially if it's something they don't like, they're just going to put it aside and then they're not going to deliver the information that you need, whether it's a data room or whatever for diligence, right? Yeah. And so I would say plan for those contingencies and make them an active partner in that planning as much as possible.
We absolutely do. They just don't expect it sometimes.
Yeah.
As it is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you don't know what you don't know, right? Until they do it. Yeah.
We do have a very strong conversation at maybe the week after listing, and we play devil's advocate and say, if I'll buy in your company, I'm going to ask these 10 to 20 really tough questions. And we give it to them in a format to where we send them home for a week to answer these and then write down the documentation that you'll need to prove. And so we try to get all our due diligence, almost done before we ever have a letter of intent. We do 20 to 40 hours worth of, everything's in zip files. We have a share file. It's ready. Due diligence is just about ready for them. So it's just a little bit less painful.
Yeah.
And take some of the emotion out of it.
Yeah, it does. And those are the kinds of things that help take the emotion out of it, for sure. That's great.
And we're the bad guy, not the
yeah.
And that makes it
Yeah.
a little bit easier.
Yeah. And I think that's also the process that Matt was talking about earlier with that document that he has. And I'm sure every one of you have your own process for making this happen. Okay. Anything else you want to, any other comments? Okay. So I'd like to talk about brains. We all have one. The thing is that our brain actually has not evolved a great deal with the exponential innovation and technology and disruption that happens every day. So there are a couple of things that I would like to draw to your attention. My favorite book on this topic is Your Brain at Work by David Rock. And there are drivers of behavior, and then there are things that really demand a lot of energy of our brains. Drivers of behavior we talked about earlier, and there's this great acronym, SCARF. And it's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And so with these particular drivers of behavior, these are the things that you as advisors can use as filters or as lenses to change back and forth as you're looking at someone who has gotten to a particular point in the deal and are not being value added in the process. And so I would invite you to take a look at what's driving the behavior. I'm not talking about status like expensive car or clothing or whatever. I'm talking about the kind of status from our ancestors where somebody would kill a woolly mammoth and the rest of us would be crowding around the kill saying, can we have some? And the guy's like, yeah, sure, but you guys are all going to owe me. It's that sense of stature, importance, prominence. And a lot of the people that you're working with, once they sell their business, they may or may not enjoy that sense of status or prominence that they did while they were owners of that company. And that is a really difficult thing for somebody for whom status is a driver of behavior. Then certainty. They want to know what's going to happen. So for those owners for whom certainty is one of their drivers, the fact that each of you have a process and you tell them what to expect and what to happen, they're going to hold you to it, right? And if that happens to be one of your own drivers of behavior, then you are going to be much more likely to hold that person accountable to the best of your ability, because you too are going to want to know what to expect. The next is autonomy. If you have an owner that is very much wanting to take charge and be in charge of the process and overrides a lot of your advice and your recommendations, that person is probably somebody who's driven by autonomy. And then we have relatedness, and those are the owners that we're familiar with that very much care about their employees, their well-being, the interaction that the company has with the community. These are likely their drivers. And then finally, fairness. Now, we talked a little bit about greed earlier, and we also talked about somebody who tried to sell their company and they couldn't. If fairness is a driver for that person, that is going to be a big sticking point for them. They've decided, and I believe that fairness is one of the places that give shows up, that grandiose inflated valuation expectation. That person has decided that at this number it's fair, and any other number isn't fair. They put the blood, sweat, and tears in. It doesn't matter about the market, the industry, the recommendations of their advisors. Those are things, these are opportunities for you as advisors, number one, to determine if this is the client that you really think will be value added in the process and whether or not you want to take them on. And then secondly, to look at identify your own, right? Identify your own drivers of behavior, and then also identify how the drivers of the client, the behaviors of the client, will show up in the process. So let's say, for example, again, fairness. You get through diligence. You've got some other things coming up. Maybe there's inventory questions. And the person's like, well, but I paid for this. I mean, I'm not gonna let that go. No. So if you already know that fairness is one of their drivers of behavior, you're going to know how best to answer and show up as the advisor in that situation. Okay, so the other thing about our brain is that it takes a lot of energy to change our assumptions, interpretations, and limiting beliefs. And so with this type of brain use, when we reappraise, we're asking our clients many times to reinterpret data. Okay, if you're handing data to somebody who feels that their company is worth this and it's this, you're asking their brain to totally wipe out what they have believed maybe for years and present them with a whole different set of facts. As advisors, you have the opportunity to give them the opportunity to do that, to create the space, but it's going to take time. Then there's normalizing. We've talked a lot about that. This is what happens during these kinds of processes. This is a normal way that these deals progress, so that they are able to understand that even though it's uncomfortable and new and sometimes excruciating for them, it's how it happens and other people manage. The third is reordering. So let's say, for example, their hierarchy has always been to sell a business, live on a beach, have bazillion dollars in the bank. That's kind of what's always driven them. But then it's not going to really happen that way. So they are going to have to work, their brains are going to have to work to reorder that. And maybe it has nothing to do with you or the transaction. Maybe they now have a health crisis and that's why they're selling. And they're not going to be able to go and live on a beach somewhere. If that's the case, their brains are going to be struggling with that task of reordering while you're trying to get them to be fully present and show up in the diligence process. The last one is repositioning. And so with repositioning, they are no longer going to be the owner of that company. They're going to have to formulate a new identity. They're going to have to become another person. And each of us who's had this experience understand that this is a big process for an owner, or an owner-founder even more so. As advisors, you have the opportunity in the conversations that you have, even in the little chit-chat that you have around the issues that come up in the transaction, to create the space for the person to begin these processes, to begin to think about who they're going to be after the sale. Any comments? Yes.
That's one of my motivating questions when I first meet a client is, what are you going to do after the sale?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the answers that you get?
Well, disqualifiers, I have no clue.
Yeah. How many of you get, I have no clue? Yeah, number of people. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people, when I ask that question, think I'm talking about financing. How are you going to finance your retirement? But it's not that question at all.
Right.
Your average entrepreneur works 68.5 hours a week on their business. How are you going to fill those 68.5 hours a week?
Yeah.
There's only so much golf you can play. There's only so many cruises you can go on.
Grandkids.
Grandkids.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what do you do to take that conversation farther?
Probe. Just probe. They feel uncomfortable about it in some cases. Sometimes people appreciate it, but frankly, we won't proceed unless they've got a good idea what they're going to do after post-retirement, because it's more than just money.
Yeah, it sure is. Do any of the others of you use that as a distinguishing factor for determining whether you're going to take a deal? Yeah? Yeah?
Although if you don't, then getting through the process, you'll get pointing back to they're never going to be happier than when they start the list right there. So pointing back to that and get through that part of due diligence. Say, well, how are your grandkids? Remember you wanted to move and see them more. I mean, that's a big motivating factor.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the last exercise with your most difficult clients, identify the drivers, and then if you can, thinking back on that situation, look at where they were in the reappraisal process. So I'm going to go back to that slide so that you have that in front of you. So I've found in my work with my clients who are at this place of transitioning in these kinds of transactions that these tools have served me well. And I really appreciate each of you attending today, and I very much appreciate your time. And if you have any questions or comments, I would welcome those. So thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thanks.